Elara lived in a world polished to a shine. Each morning, sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, illuminating her family's manor like a silent cathedral. She was the crown jewel of the house, a violin prodigy whose fingers moved with divine precision. To the world, she was destined for greatness, but the mahogany instrument felt more like a gilded cage than a tool for art. Her father, a man as cold as the marble floors he walked upon, mapped out every second of her life. There was no room for spontaneity, only the relentless pursuit of technical perfection. She lived within the silence of expectation, her world defined by the notes on a page and the heavy pride of her family name. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday. Seeking a brief respite from her suffocating practice schedule, Elara slipped out of the manor gate. Beneath a flickering street lamp, she saw him. Kaito was a whirlwind of color, kneeling on the wet pavement, staining the gray world with neon blues and oranges as he painted a mural on a crumbling wall. His raw, untamed energy was unlike anything she had ever seen in the stiff, silent concert halls. When he looked up and grinned at her, inviting her to help him finish the sky, Elara felt a spark of life. In that moment, the rain wasn't an inconvenience. It was a baptism into a new world of freedom. Secret meetings soon became her heartbeat. Away from the watchful eyes of tutors, she learned what it meant to actually live. She swapped 5-course galas for steaming bowls of street vendor ramen, laughing as the spicy broth warmed her from the inside out. They spent hours in cramped, dim cafes, sharing dreams over cheap coffee that tasted better than vintage wine. Kaito saw the girl behind the prodigy. He told her that her wealth was a shroud, a heavy curtain keeping her from the true beauty of the world. Elara believed him. She convinced herself her privilege was a barrier to authentic connection. He was her soulmate, the only person who had ever truly seen her soul. But shadows eventually found her. Elara's father discovered her secret life. In the vast, silent library, he offered a cold ultimatum. She could choose the family legacy and a prestigious world tour, or leave with nothing but the clothes on her back to live with a commoner. It was a choice between a life of predetermined luxury and a life of unpredictable love. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Elara chose love. She left the manor with only her violin. Isya, the heavy iron gates clanging shut behind her with a finality that echoed in her chest. Reality was brutal. Their apartment was a drafty one-room walk-up with a rattling heater that barely fought the cold. Hunger became a constant companion, but she believed their love was enough to conquer any hardship. When Kaito lamented that he couldn't afford the supplies to reach his potential, Elara didn't hesitate. She sold her world-class violin to a pawnshop for a fraction of its value. She watched it disappear into the back room, feeling as though a limb had been severed, but she convinced herself it was a necessary sacrifice for his future. To support them, Elara took a job hauling supplies at a nearby construction site. Her soft, dexterous hands became cracked and calloused, the skin ruined for the instrument she once loved. One evening, while reaching into Kaito's discarded jacket, she found a folded bank statement. The balance was staggering, a massive sum she never imagined he possessed. He wasn't poor. He wasn't struggling at all. As the cold realization hit her, she heard the front door creak open and Kaito's footsteps echoed in the hallway, his shadow stretching across the floor. She stared at the numbers, her vision blurring as the lies she had lived for months finally began to unravel in her hands. The paper felt like lead in Elara's hand as Kaito stepped into the dim apartment. When she confronted him about the bank statement, the expected apology never came. Instead, his eyes turned cold, flickering with a resentment that chilled her to the bone. He didn't deny the money, he weaponized it. He accused her of being a spy, claiming that her aristocratic upbringing had made her naturally suspicious of those who had to claw their way up from nothing. He argued that the funds were a necessary reserve for his career, something her pampered mind would never understand. Every word was a tactical blow, designed to make her feel guilty for even questioning his honesty. As Kaito's distance grew, the physical toll on Elara became unbearable. She worked grueling double shifts, first at a jagged construction site and then at a grease-stained diner. The rhythmic labor was a far cry from the delicate cadenzas of her past. Her hands, once the instruments of a prodigy, were now broken tools, Thick calluses formed over the pads of her fingers, and deep, permanent scars traced across her knuckles. The dexterity required for the violin was gone, replaced by a stiff, aching heaviness that made even gripping a spoon difficult. She was a ghost of her former self, a musician who could no longer play, sacrificing her identity to pay for a life where she was becoming an unwanted guest. Isolation became her only companion. Hidden from Elara's sight, her mother's letters sat in a locked drawer in Kaito's studio. They contained desperate pleas and the news that her father was nearing his final breath, his pride finally crumbling under the weight of his mortality. Kaito made sure she never saw them. Whenever Elara expressed a sliver of longing for her old life, he would weave a web of lies, telling her that he had checked on her family and that they had officially disowned her, scrubbed her name from the records. He fed her the bitter poison of abandonment, making her believe that he was the only soul in the universe who would ever truly love her. Kaito's star rose with dizzying speed. His raw and urban style became the obsession of the elite art circles. He began to inhabit a world of silk and champagne, while Elara remained trapped in the world of grit and grime. When the grand opening of his first major gallery exhibition arrived, he looked at her with a sneer of subtle disgust. He told her she didn't fit the aesthetic of the evening. He claimed that her rough appearance and scarred hands would be a distraction to the refined donors. He asked her to stay in the shadows, effectively erasing her from the very success she had funded with her own sweat and blood. After he left for the gala, Elara's restlessness drove her into his forbidden studio. She needed to feel close to him, but what she found was a betrayal of the soul. Hidden beneath a pile of charcoal drawings was a leather-bound sketchbook. She opened it, expecting to see her own face, but instead, she was met with the hauntingly familiar features of her former rival from the music conservatory. The sketches were obsessive, capturing every nuance of the woman who had taken Elara's place on the world stage. It wasn't just art, it was a map of his true desires. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had been a stepping stone, a temporary muse discarded for a more polished reflection of the world he craved. Fueled by desperation and rage, Elara dressed in her best remaining clothes and headed to the gallery. She slipped through the side door, her heart hammering against her ribs. In the center of the glittering room, beneath the glow of the spotlights, Kaito was laughing with a sickening pride. He wasn't alone. He held the hand of the woman from the sketches, his former rival. As the crowd cheered, the gallery owner announced their engagement, praising the union of the city's newest genius and its brightest musical star. Elara stood frozen. The champagne glass in Kaito's hand didn't even tremble when his eyes finally locked onto Elara's across the crowded gallery. She stood like a jagged shadow against the pristine white walls, her work-worn coat and scarred hands a jarring contrast to the silk and diamonds surrounding her. When she moved toward him, the crowd parted, not out of respect, but out of a subtle, instinctual recoiling from her raw, unpolished presence. She called his name, her voice cracking with the weight of months of unpaid labor and silent sacrifices. Kaito didn't flinch. He didn't offer a frantic explanation or a desperate apology. Instead, he leaned toward the woman at his side, the rival who had usurped Elara's place in the orchestra, and whispered something that made her laugh, a sharp, crystalline sound that echoed like breaking glass. It was the sound of a world Elara no longer belonged to, a world she had traded for a lie. As Elara reached him, the air between them turned to ice. Kaito stepped forward, not to greet her, but to physically block her from the sight of the prestigious donors who watched with cold curiosity. "You shouldn't have come here, Elara," he hissed, his voice devoid of the warmth that had once promised her a lifetime of freedom. When she confronted him about the secret bank accounts, the hidden letters from her father, and the sketchbook filled with another woman's face, his mask finally shattered. There was no guilt in his eyes, only a profound sense of embarrassment. He admitted, with a chillingly calm tone, that he had targeted her from the beginning. She was the daughter of an aristocrat, a name that carried weight even if she had renounced it. He had used her remaining savings and her grueling physical labor to fund his rise, treating her not as a partner, but as a silent, disposable engine for his own ambition. He looked at her calloused, trembling hands, the hands of a broken prodigy, and told her she was no longer a muse, but a reminder of a struggle he had successfully left behind. The betrayal was a physical blow, more painful than any injury she had sustained at the construction site. Elara realized she hadn't just lost her status, she had allowed a predator to consume her very identity. Her gift was gone. Her family was a memory, and the man she had sacrificed everything for had never truly existed. Before she could speak, the rival stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with a cruel, triumphant light. With a mocking smile, she reached into her designer clutch and pulled out $100 bill, tucking it into the pocket of Elara's tattered coat. "For your hard work," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. The gallery's security guards stepped in immediately. They gripped Elara's arms and dragged her through the opulent foyer, throwing her out into the street. She landed on the cold, wet pavement, the same rain where they had first met now washing over her like a shroud of indifference. Driven by a ghost of a hope, she made her way to her family's mansion. But the iron gates were chained and a sold sign stood like a headstone on the manicured lawn. A passerby who recognized her through the grime told her the truth. Her father had passed away weeks ago, and the estate had been liquidated. Kaito had stolen her final chance for reconciliation, leaving her truly alone in a city that had forgotten her name. Exhausted and hollow, Elara wandered into a deserted city park. As she sat on a damp wooden bench, her fingers brushed against something hard, a cheap, discarded wooden flute left behind in the grass. Her hands ached, the stiffened joints protesting every movement, but she lifted the instrument to her lips. The first note was thin and trembling, but as she played a simple, haunting melody, she felt a flicker of something she thought she had lost forever. It wasn't the perfection of the conservatory or the roar of a concert hall. It was the sound of a woman who had finally found her own breath. Kaito had stolen her past and broken her hands, but as she stood up and walked away from the glittering city lights, she realized he could never own the music that lived within her silence. She was no longer a victim or a prodigy, she was finally free.